Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast live stream, a daily live stream as long as this war is raging. We are on day 10 right now, and Israel still is poised to invade Gaza by air, land, and sea. According to the Israel Defense Forces, the invasion has not happened yet, but clearly it's on everyone's mind as we observe what's unfolding right now in the Middle East. The other big piece to this that's on everyone's mind is the potential for multiple fronts, additional fronts in addition to Gaza to open. And another indicator of that possibility came today when Iran's Speaker of the Parliament, their parliament speaker, said that if Israel invades Gaza on the ground, quote, they will open the gates of hell. Happy Monday from the Iranian regime. But in all seriousness, Iran, as we've reported here in the live stream over the past few days, has been espousing this kind of rhetoric now for days, saying, number one, Iran's foreign minister saying that Iran's finger is on the trigger, quote, if Israel invades, saying it will unleash a huge earthquake. And the thing we've hit on, folks, here in the live stream over the past few days is that Iran is effectively holding a gun not only to Israel's head, but to the world's head. The Iranian regime right now is flexing and saying we have the power to ignite the region and potentially spark a world war. That's the kind of arrogance that the Iranian regime is showing right now. Another word I've used for it is brazenness, meaning the Iranian regime doesn't seem to have any fear of any sort of consequences for its actions. It ignited the region, obviously, on October 7th. Its fingerprints are all over the Hamas attack, whether it was directly involved in the planning. We do know that over the past several weeks, Iranian officials, Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps officials, were meeting with Hamas and Hezbollah officials in Beirut, and they weren't meeting to talk about the weather. Let's just say that. They were meeting to plan further attacks against the world's one and only Jewish state. And now Iran is threatening openly, saying we have the power in Tehran, in the form of the regime, to open additional fronts. Basically, folks, this all rests and leads back to the head of the snake, the Iranian regime. If they tell Hezbollah to stand down in the north, Hezbollah will stand down. If they would have told Hamas and Islamic Jihad to stand down in Gaza, we would not have seen what we saw, the massacre, the Hamas invasion last weekend of southern Israel. Again, some have called the Iranian regime an octopus, saying its tentacles stretch across the region, even as far south as Yemen with the Houthis, and of course in Iraq and Shia, those militias, those Iranian-backed Shia militias. It's a ring of fire. That's what we've called it here in the newscast, that surrounds Israel on all sides, armed to the teeth with rockets, missiles, and attack drones. And now Israel is on the verge of going into Gaza because it must. Folks, listen, and this is a good way to start the live stream. Comment on this. We have thousands with us now. We'll have thousands more before we are done here. Again, we're going daily. And please, if you have not subscribed, make sure to subscribe to the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. Every day, we're coming to you live, covering the war in the Middle East and why it matters to you, no matter where you live. And we're covering this from a biblical perspective, because we believe these are Bible prophetic times that we are living in right now. But this ring of fire, again, I use the phrase armed to the teeth. Consider this, Hezbollah alone to the north, which is the crown jewel of this ring of fire for the Iranian regime. Iran's chief proxy is armed to the teeth with some 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of Israel. And that's just for starters. That's only one ring on that ring of fire. Now, here is the state of play right now as Israel, and I mentioned a minute ago, must go in on the ground in Gaza. This is a good way to start today, I think, by just laying it all on the table and seeing what you think and getting your views here. We have a very active chat that I'm watching go down on the side of my screen right now, so be sure to weigh in and give me your thoughts as well, what you think, where this is all heading. Folks, consider this. If Israel does not crush Hamas decisively, if in the wake of the worst terror attack in Israel's history. Israel's 9/11, Israel's Pearl Harbor. At least 1,300 mostly Israeli civilians slaughtered in cold blood, many in their beds. Some say it's now as many as 1,400 Israeli civilians, well over 200 Israeli soldiers slaughtered in cold blood. An unprecedented massacre on Israeli soil. And by the way, as Israeli rescue teams and medical teams and investigators are combing throughout southern Israel right now, the region along the Gaza border that Hamas quite literally invaded. At least 1,200 Hamas jihadis, perhaps as many as 1,500, and also Palestinian civilians and Hamas supporters flooded through those breached security fences as well, that breached security fence along the border. But now investigators are saying, as they're picking up the pieces here and finding burnt and charred and beheaded and dismembered bodies, they're saying that some 80% of the dead bodies, the corpses that they are finding in southern Israel of Israeli civilians, show signs of torture. 80%. So before Hamas massacred these families wholesale, parents as their children watched, children as their parents watched, they tortured them first. And where's all those deniers? We have the Holocaust deniers who deny that Hitler's Holocaust ever happened. I've walked through the death camps. I've been to Treblinka, Auschwitz, Majdanek, and more, folks. I've seen it with my own two eyes. I've seen the ovens. I've seen the gas chambers. Yet we have this madness known as Holocaust denial. Also temple denial, those who say that a Jewish temple never stood in Jerusalem. Now we have a new deranged variant. I call it Holocaust denial 2.0, because what happened last weekend was a mini Holocaust. These were the worst crimes perpetrated against the Jewish people since World War II. But we already have a very active voice on social media and at protests around the world right now, including where I'm sitting right now in the United States, with thousands upon thousands, not only denying the dismemberments, the burnings, the beheadings, the massacre itself, but cheering it on. They're gleeful about it. They're happy about it. From Australia to Germany to London to New York City. What we've seen right now is pretty much the opposite of what we saw in the wake of the Holocaust out of the ashes of World War II. When the world discovered what was done to the Jewish people during the Holocaust, Hitler's wholesale massacre of 6 million Jews, the world was outraged, mortified, horrified, and declared never again. Well, as many have said in the past few days, never again is now. And we saw a mini version of Hitler's work with the modern day Hitlers, the modern day Hamans, modern day Nazis just wearing a different uniform known as Hamas last weekend. But the world's reaction, much of the world, not all of the world, much of the world too, obviously is horrified and showing solidarity with Israel, thankfully. But I think it's undeniable, and you're watching this, folks, as well as I am over the past several days, that there is a not insignificant chunk of the world that is not only indifferent to the massacre of Jews, but is literally cheering it on. These, quote, pro-Palestinian rallies are really pro-Hamas rallies. In not one of these rallies have we heard a clarion call for the release of hostages that Hamas dragged into the bowels of hell beneath Gaza last week. Not once. And by the way, the Israel Defense Forces confirmed today that at least 199 hostages were taken last weekend. Elderly, women, children, young people, older people, the whole gamut. This hostage crisis extends. And we're also hearing that Hamas certainly has plans to use these poor people as human shields as Israel advances on the ground eventually. Again, that ground invasion has been delayed. We don't know quite why. We talked about this on yesterday's live stream. Perhaps it was weather considerations. Perhaps Israel also has some plans to, God willing, free these hostages in a miraculous way. Folks, it's a tall order right now. Let's be honest. Hamas has these tunnels dug under the ground underneath Gaza City, an elaborate labyrinth of tunnels dug throughout Gaza, in particular under Gaza City. Who knows where the hostages are right now, but Israel certainly will make every effort to rescue them before going in. Because when Israel does go in, Hamas is going to massacre those hostages, God. That's the, folks, that's the fear, God forbid. I talked about this on the last 2 live streams. As you pray with me for the hostages, for their miraculous release, and man, it would be a miracle. But God's arm is not too short. I recounted Genesis 14. Go back and check it out right now if you have not yet. When Abraham, against all odds, took a group of 318 well-trained men, took them north and rescued his nephew Lot, who was being held hostage, captive by pagan Canaanite tribes. It's a legendary story in Genesis 14. Legendary and true, laid out in Genesis 14. So I'm praying for that kind of miraculous rescue for the hostages right now, and I hope you can join me in that. But nonetheless, the reaction of the world, not all, clearly not all. Much of the Western world mortified, obviously, and saying all the right things right now. But when the rubber hits the road, so to speak, and we talked about this yesterday, and by the way, if you miss any of our live streams, any of our videos, you can check it out here in our archives. Just go to the homepage, right under newscasts. It's right there. But when Israel, say a week goes by, and Israel, is full bore crushing, pulverizing Hamas, then what does the world say? Does the reaction all of a sudden become, we pretty much forgot what happened on October 7th, and now we're just focused on Israel using quote-unquote disproportionate force? It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, in particular with the Biden administration. And by the way, I lost my train of thought a bit. There's so much to talk about. I know this is kind of a fire hose with information coming out at you from all directions, but there's a lot going on, and we'd rather you know than not know in the time we have together here on the live stream. What I was saying earlier, and I'll finish that thought now, is that if Israel does not follow through, if Israel caves to world pressure and does not crush Hamas as any sort of threat to the state of Israel ever again, if Israel is not, or if Hamas, is not decisively defeated, then Israel will embolden its enemies. Because look, there's been a lot of talk out of Israeli leaders, military and government officials over the past week, and rightly so, saying we're going to crush Hamas, Hamas will cease to exist, we're going to completely destroy them, every Hamas member is a dead man, I'm quoting, and on and on. If that doesn't happen, and if Hamas is left to fight another day, and Israel caves to international pressure and a premature ceasefire, then that sends, talk about the exact wrong message to the Iranian regime and Hezbollah, and by extension, the Houthis and those Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, and even to China and Russia, and to Turkey. It will show that Israel is vulnerable, that Israel is susceptible to international pressure, and that if Israel couldn't defeat Hamas, how on earth could Israel defeat Hezbollah and the Iranian regime? Hezbollah, which is several magnitudes stronger and better equipped than Hamas. Folks, I lay that out to you. Do you agree? What do you think? To me, if Israel does not finish the job here and destroy Hamas, and Hamas lives to fight another day and launch more rockets after this war and more cross-border attacks, God forbid, then Israel's enemies will be salivating. They were already salivating, by the way, before the war began, before the invasion on October 7th, because they saw Israel as weakened because of internal disunity, political infighting, massive demonstrations, etc. I'm not blaming that on the attack, okay? I'm not saying that was the cause of the attack. Let's straighten that out there right away. But what I am saying is that Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah were gloating about that, and they saw Israel as more vulnerable because the nation seemed very divided. The good news is that Israel has never been more united. You can see that right now in the wake of this attack. And over 100% of all reserves called up reported. During the days of the judicial reform demonstrations, which for now are far in the rear view, there was talk of Israeli reserves not reporting for duty, etc. What Hamas did here was to wake a sleeping giant and to do what many Israelis thought was impossible, unify the Israeli public. And in the process, I believe Hamas signed its own death warrant. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, is a student of history. He lost his brother Yoni, Jonathan Netanyahu, obviously in the Entebbe raid. Ironically enough, a hostage rescue in 1976. He was one of the Paul Revere's, I would say, an Israeli version of counterterrorism, saying they're coming. The jihadists are coming. He told the world for years and years. Now he is uniquely positioned for such a time as this to defeat one of Israel's greatest foes, a persistent thorn in Israel's side. And that brings us to Iran and Hezbollah. I want to revisit, by the way, Russia and China. Let's actually do that real quick. Russia, number one, sitting back and watching its allies, Iran and Hezbollah, saber rattled. Which side of the ledger do you think Russia falls on? Folks, I said it yesterday. I will reiterate. Vladimir Putin is not a friend of Israel. Bar none. Not a friend of Israel. He is, though, despite Benjamin Netanyahu's frequent visits to Moscow, etc. You can tell who your real friends are in times of crisis. Where is Russia right now? Russia compared what Israel's doing in Gaza to Leningrad, what the Nazis did in Leningrad. Vladimir Putin, this was on Friday, effectively comparing Israelis to Nazis. And he's not the first Russian official to do so over the past year. He's calling for a UN Security Council meeting today and resolutions perhaps against Israel as he continues to cleave closer and closer to the Iranian regime. You can tell a lot about a man by the company he keeps. And the company Vladimir Putin keeps is Iran, North Korea, and China. The Gathering Storm Coalition, as I call them, not to mention Hamas. Look, Vladimir Putin has hosted 2 Hamas delegations in Moscow over the past year. So very interesting, especially from a prophetic sense, from an Ezekiel 38 and 39 sense, to see how Russia moves here and what direction Putin goes in. And China as well, both Russia and China, observing this taking place in the Middle East, all the chaos unfolding, and saying, wow, in Russia's case, it distracts the world from Ukraine, obviously. In China's case, it distracts the world from Taiwan. So they have an interest in seeing this prolonged. Do China and Russia. And both aligned with Iran. Look, Russia and Iran, a formal military alliance, where the Iranian war machine is really helping to drive the Russian war machine in Ukraine. Russia has become reliant on Iranian arms, and in particular, those Iranian suicide drones. China, about a year and a half ago, signed a long-term cooperation deal with Iran. I believe it's 25 years, that cooperation deal. They're 20 or 25 years, a cooperation deal between China's communist regime and the Iranian regime. China will supply Iran with arms, economic assistance, and Iran will supply China with cheap energy, cheap oil and gas. And then there's North Korea supplying Russia with munitions. Kim Jong-un, a few weeks ago, met with Vladimir Putin. So it gives you an idea of the prophetic chess pieces right now moving on the board. And one of the major ones right now is along that Israel-Lebanon border. Let's break it down. This is the title, of course, of today's newscast. We got there eventually. But the Israel Defense Forces have evacuated some 28 communities in northern Israel near the Lebanon border in the shadow of Hezbollah land. Remember, Hezbollah rules southern Lebanon with an iron fist, much like Hamas rules over Gaza. 28 beautiful communities, including a community like Metula, right along the border. That's the northernmost Israeli community. I've spent a lot of times, folks. I've slept in these communities. I've spent time there. Beautiful, majestic scenery, the mountains, and southern Lebanon as well. That's a tragedy. And just as in Gaza, which has beautiful beaches on the Mediterranean coast, southern Lebanon has beautiful scenery. Both places, Gaza and southern Lebanon, could be tourist destinations, vacation spots, honeymoon spots even. But not now, while both are under the jackboot of Iranian-sponsored terrorists. But southern Lebanon is certainly a beautiful landscape. I've looked out across that landscape, folks, many times, and inside of civilian homes in southern Lebanon that look so idyllic to the naked eye. You have Hezbollah rockets and missiles. They use civilian homes, does Hezbollah, as places to launch rockets from. So does Hamas, human shields. That's why Hamas right now is refusing to allow Palestinians to evacuate southward, because then Hamas wouldn't have them to use as human shields. And they wouldn't have the bodies of dead Palestinian civilians, dead because of Hamas. Hamas at this point bears sole responsibility for any dead civilians in Gaza. Israel now, since Thursday or Friday of last week, has been calling for people to evacuate. Days now. No other military in the world would do this, by the way. Israel and the United States, the most humane fighting forces in world history. I'll say it again. The Israel Defense Forces, probably, along with the U.S. That's the only reason I say possibly. Israel and the U.S., the most humane fighting forces in world history. Please, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. No other nation would do this, would, in effect, hold up its ground invasion against a determined genocidal foe in Hamas to allow civilians to evacuate. And we need to have an expert on this week in international law. There's some people I have in mind who have been unanimous in saying, hey, wait a minute, Israel is following all of the international rules of war. Not that its enemies are, but Israel is, and then some. But it breaks my heart right now to see the communities in northern Israel evacuate. It truly does, because I love those communities, and it breaks my heart what happened in southern Israel, folks. I've been there many, many times along the Gaza border. You've seen me there if you watch the show on a regular basis. Speaking of those communities, many people in the past 10 days have said, Erick, how can I help? You know, I'm here in Britain, or I'm in Africa, I'm in Asia, I'm in Brazil, I'm in the United States, I'm not in Israel. How can I help the people of Israel right now who are besieged by terror? A great organization that I work with personally, I can give you a bunch, but one that I know personally, I don't recommend just any organization unless I've had hands-on experience with that organization. I know what they're all about. Mer Panim, an incredible Israel-based organization. Now, usually Mer Panim is feeding Israel's hungry and impoverished, and there's a good amount. Children, Holocaust survivors, in its beautiful soup kitchens around the land of Israel, and bringing meals door to door to people's homes. Incredible work that Mer Panim does. I've been with them helping to feed Holocaust survivors. Memories I'll never forget. Right now, Mer Panim's main initiative is helping the victims of terror, of Hamas terror, and helping those communities in the South in particular. Also now, I'm certain, helping the northern communities that have evacuated. Hot meals, encouragement. So mpgive.org, Mer Panim, mpgive.org, doing God's work. And that's an organization I can highly recommend to you, because, look, if you watch this show on a regular basis, I don't recommend many organizations. Mer Panim's the real deal. I've seen it up close. mpgive.org. You'll make a difference, because they are. You'll help them do so. Okay. Big question now looms over everyone as these skirmishes along the northern border continue between Israel and Hezbollah. Does Hezbollah get involved? Many schools of thought on this. I don't want to reiterate again what we talked about yesterday and Saturday to a degree, but three schools of thought. Number one, the Iranian regime says, not now, not yet. And the Iranian regime reluctantly allows Hamas to be crushed. Now, in doing so, the Iranian regime loses a crucial ring in that ring of fire. Will Iran's not going to just easily let that go. Hamas has been a huge benefit to Iran's overall strategy over the past several years, a persistent thorn in Israel's side out of Gaza that really had no solution. Now, Israel's solution in the wake of last weekend, clearly to crush Hamas. But it has been a thorn in Israel's side for years. Rockets, terror tunnels, the list goes on. Iran loses that if Hamas is crushed and Gaza is pacified. Will Iran let that go? I think that's a big question right now. Is Iran willing to let Gaza go and say, okay, we're going to bolster Hezbollah even more, perhaps the Houthis, the militias in Iraq and Syria even more? That's the big question. Or does Iran say, we're all in, this is the time, Israel is weakened, it's distracted to the south, let's do it now? Or does Iran say, you know what, we'll hold Hezbollah. One reason we're going to hold Hezbollah in reserve is because if and when the day comes, I believe it's when, that Israel strikes Iran's nuclear facilities, Iran will need Hezbollah for its counterattack. Clearly, Iran's main reaction force when Israel strikes those nuclear facilities will be Hezbollah to the north. So a lot of scenarios here, folks. If anyone's telling you, I know what's going to happen, they're lying to you. No one knows except God above. And right now, it certainly is tenuous and precarious, to say the least, along that northern border. But we will know, it seems, in the coming days. I don't know that Israel will wait much longer to launch that ground invasion, because the element of surprise is completely gone at this point, for the most part, it seems. And you have to believe that Hamas terrorists are further entrenching themselves and digging in those tunnels underground and elsewhere, setting booby traps and trying to make Gaza a death trap for the IDF. So I don't know how much longer Israel can wait. I'm not a military strategist. I've interviewed many Israeli military strategists, generals, military officials, etc. These are brilliant guys. They know what they're doing. And a ground invasion is not something you mount hastily and haphazardly, clearly. But when this ground invasion does commence, we will know at some point where Hezbollah stands. Will Hezbollah just continue these limited, which have been deadly, at least 2 Israelis killed by Hezbollah over the past week? In normal times, that may be the kind of act, to be frank, folks, that would spark an all-out war. But obviously, Israel is heavily preoccupied, and then some, in Gaza to the south right now. But if Israel was not, and Hezbollah did something like that, and 2 Israelis were killed, it's not certain what Israel's response would have been. And it may have been an overwhelming response. Expect the unexpected in today's Middle East. Rule of thumb for you as you watch. Expect the unexpected in the world's most chaotic and volatile region, no doubt. So that's the state of play today. But we will know in the coming days. And by the way, rockets continue to be launched out of Gaza on a regular basis, practically around the clock, reaching today as far as Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Friends of mine, including my TBN colleague Joel Rosenberg, host of the Rosenberg Report on TBN, also allisrael.com. He runs a great website, all things Middle East. Joel reported on this as well today in Jerusalem, where he's based, and where, hey, Jerusalem's my second home. I do a great deal of filming in God's city. I love that city. Again, my second home. Today, Jerusalemites were running for cover as sirens went off in Jerusalem. And Tel Aviv now, it's become a regular occurrence over the past few years. Tel Aviv is now a regular target of Hamas rockets. Not saying they all land in Tel Aviv successfully, but Tel Aviv now is constantly on a state of high alert. Those Hamas rockets are able now to travel further and carry a bigger payload. And that's been a major development over the past few years, trending in a terrible direction for Israel. But the prayer now is that Israel goes in and Israel takes care of business, and that the rockets stop for good out of Gaza. That's the goal, because not only do you have Hamas there, folks, you also have Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another Iranian proxy, which Israel must deal with before all the dust settles here. But we will know in the coming days whether Hezbollah is getting involved. We pray that this does not expand to a multi-front war, that Israel can do what it needs to be done with Hamas and Islamic Jihad. But let's not kid ourselves, folks. Eventually, Israel and Hezbollah will have a showdown to the north. I've called it the Great Northern War, where Israel will face off against Hezbollah in Lebanon and in Syria, and as well as the Iranian regime and their various jihadi allies. Speaking of Syria, watch Syria in the days to come. Israel has struck Aleppo International Airport at least twice over the past 3 days. Israel also the other day struck Damascus International Airport. We reported that here in the newscast. Why would Israel do that? The same reason they've done it for the past several years, because the Iranian regime continues to attempt to transit advanced weapons through those airports, many times in civilian airliners. Transit those weapons in order to deliver them to Hezbollah, not only in Syria, but also in southern Lebanon. It's a non-starter for Israel, an absolute red line that Israel will not accept. So you've seen the airports struck, crippled over the past few days. Perhaps Iran is saying, you know what, we want to preserve Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, but we'll ignite Syria instead, another northern front. We'll still open a second front, but in Syria and not in southern Lebanon. Folks, we shall see. Again, no one has the answers here where this is all heading. It's a combustible, unpredictable situation that we're seeing right now in the Middle East for sure. Prophetically, earlier we mentioned Ezekiel 38 and 39, the war of Gog and Magog. Funny name, I know, but check it out. Ezekiel 38 and 39, Isaiah 17, and the not-so-rosy future of Damascus. So there's many scenarios here prophetically that could be lining up. And now that the Saudi-Israel normalization deal for now is absolutely on hold, where does that go long term? The world right now, much of the world is going to be it's already crying out for peace. But when the dust settles here, people even more are going to be saying, enough, we can't take it anymore. So much madness in the world right now. And eventually someone will step on the world stage who seems to have all the answers, and his initials are AC. It's the Antichrist. And eventually he will emerge on the world scene. No one knows when, only God knows the hour. But for now, let's focus on what's happening right now in the Middle East, the immediate future. But it's hard not to look long-term as you see things, frankly, lining up, folks, and prophetic chess pieces moving on the board. Hey, take heart. Don't go now and hide under your chair, hide under your desk and say, oh, my word, it's all crashing down. Whatever will I do? I'm a follower of Jesus. We have many people watching right now who are not Christians. Everyone's welcome. I'll tell you what, I've put my faith in the rock. I've built my life on the rock, the Lord Jesus. And when the winds are roaring and the waves are crashing, I don't know which way things are going, he's in the boat with me and he calms the storm. Don't put it off, folks. Now is the time, now more than ever. He's the way, the truth, and the life. I think that's a good way to end today. Continue to pray. Prayer works. If there's anything I know in my life, prayer works. So keep it up. Until tomorrow, for the entire Watchman team, thanks for watching. God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching.